So I've been playing Metal Gear Solid 3.
Snake. Why are we doing one of these really stupid codec call opening skits? Like, seriously though bro, that's fucking Angry Joe tier cringe right there. Just end it all mate, what is life? What is love?
So a couple of eons ago, my dumb fucking face stated that I was going to review all Metal Gear games in published order. I then proceeded to cover the Twin Snacks and MGS2, only to get really burned out by all of it immediately after, essentially losing my bonheur for the series. But now, I've popped some metaphorical Viagra and came back with my legitimately, no joke, not lying, highly anticipated review of Metal Gear Solid 3. We play as the ever-so-romantic Naked Snake on a mission to a jungle in Russia, a country known for its jungles, of course, to retrieve a defected Russian scientist from GRU captivity. Naturally, shit goes tits up as his mentor decides to betray him. A bunch of dudes not supposed to be there all end up being there, and before he knows it, Skimpy Python is thrusted dick forward into an international conflict that could spark a third world war. Cue the toy frogs, ghosts, a man shooting bees, and a heaving heap of James Bond. Gone are the serious and preachy undertones of the first two games, and in is a story that's willing to be self-aware, over the top, and genuinely quite fun. I mean, it takes place during the Cold War, which is obviously the funniest one, and because of that, the game ends up playing out like one big pulpy spy movie reference. Womanizing and funky gadgets included. Though what really makes the story stand out is its radiocast assisting Nude Iguana in his devious jungle adventure, consisting out of Major Zero, a stereotypical posh Major Man who's a raving James Bond fan. Paramedic, the cheeky saving food info lady who's also a massive fucking film buff and/or weeaboo. And finally, Sigint, the token black guy. And also a weapons expert and resident sassy man. And together with Streaking Lizard, these four create the Banter Cast, where every object you find and every situation you'll end up in will somehow devolve into them making fun of Snake. From running jokes to self-referential humor, this game has it all. Oh, and the cutscenes are also pretty good, I guess. For one, this incarnation of Snake is easily the funniest. Whereas Solid was stoic and a tad socially awkward, Naked is a cheeky, badass jokester. This already makes the cutscenes a lot more palpable in general, and there also aren't really all that many of them in the first place. The opening cinematics are still exorbitantly long, sure, nor are they the most exciting either, as after some really well-directed cinematic, the game subjects you to expository slideshows for about 15 minutes. But after that, and a quick little tutorial, it's just you, the jungle, and not a whole lot of mandatory interruptions, save for the few things that are actually necessary for the plot. This leads to the few that are there, while still longer than your average game, of course, honestly being a lot more deliberate. In MGS2, for instance, most of the cutscenes consisted out of nothing but slow camera pans and simple back and forth conversations. And where the pacing and purpose of that game do lend themselves to such a presentation style, I don't think it's too far-fetched to suggest that it can also be a tad boring. But in MGS3, that isn't really the case, as all cutscenes are either action scenes or dialogue-heavy sections that not only show off a new character and/or dynamic every time, like introducing one of your enemies or establishing a potential love interest, but also tend to have a lot more to show both visually and audibly. It's not just dry exposition set in the same location with the same color palette and more or less the same people each and every time. And they're also dispersed in such a way where they feel less like an intermission and more like a well-deserved moment of rest after a long, interrupted chunk of gameplay. This is, honest to fuck, really decently good popcorn entertainment with tight cinematic directing, interesting character dynamics, and a very atmospheric setting. And that's just only the stuff you're supposed to see. Much like the previous two games, MGS3 is a very arcadey stealth shooter, where the entire game is segregated into single rooms, each one presenting its own stealthy challenge. Only now, the set pieces tend to feel less obvious, as instead of literally being a bunch of squares designed with Lego, this game takes place in a jungle, with all sorts of shapes, trees, and branches obscuring the still fairly arcadey level design. These seemingly purely aesthetical changes don't necessarily change the base mechanics or anything, but they do drastically change how the player is expected to approach these. For one, you don't have a fancy cyberpunky radar ratting out all of the dudes. No vision cones, no bright lines indicating cover or streamlined design, and most importantly of all, no music. Just you, your dated as fuck gear like a directional microphone or shitty thermal goggles, and the jungle. And if you do actually want to figure out the guards' patterns, you either have to observe them for a few minutes from afar, or find a tree to climb into and hope that they don't spot you. This game's audio-visual design and its game design go hand in fucking hand in a way I honestly don't see all that often. Other games in the series kinda have that vertical slice moment, where the first bit of gameplay is by far the most interesting set piece-wise. Well, with a few exceptions of course, but in any case, here the entire game is like that. Every area not only presents its own unique challenge, but its own theme as well. Whether if it's infiltrating a base, surviving in a dark dank cave, making your way past booby traps, or even going full pulp and don some disguises. All set pieces are well thought out and mechanically different, all the while still utilizing the game's base systems. And sure, you can still play the game running and gunning like a complete mongoloid, but it'll not punish you for doing that with long-term disadvantages. Thing is that this game has quite the elaborate health system. I mean, there aren't any straight-up health items, as now your health bar regains over time. But in doing so, and the amount of shit you're carrying and intense sneaking around you'll be doing, will deplete your stamina, what you then top up by eating food. If your stamina starts running low, your eyesight will degrade, aiming will be harder, and you'll also be terrorized by the horrible sounds of Snake's growling stomach. However, if you're injured as indicated by red bar overlaying part of your health, that section won't replenish no matter how full on stamina you are. Being that you actually need to mend your own wounds using bandages, disinfectants, stitches, ointment, etc. And all of these items, including the food what you need, are finite. So, long story short, playing the game poorly, or like Rambo, which given the setting is tempting, will fuck you over by it burning through all of your shit. And you use that shit through a menu separate of the in-game UI. Many people criticize this for being slow and awkward, and yeah, I get you, dude. But in a way, it also kinda adds to the experience, as this, in essence, is a survival game. And looking at DayZ, Resident Evil, or Silent Hill 4, they all have one thing in common, regardless of whether they carry the horror prefix or not. And that's that the in-game UI tends to be quite slow and awkward. This is done to simulate survival or fear, being in the jungle, stuck on an island, or experiencing your first day on the job in a zombie-infested hellhole. Survival isn't easy. War isn't easy. And as such, I think that these menus kinda belong, regardless of them being your thing or not. With such a typically Russian rainforest setting, the most obvious thing to do would be to utilize camouflage in some way. So naturally, that's the game's main selling point. How it works though is through this thing called a camo index. The closer to 100% you are, the more hidden you'll be. It works, and it's an easy way to gauge shit. But it does also distill your actual hiddenness down to a single number. A mechanic as mechanic. That once you realize that that's all that it is, and that your actual physical cover is less important, does kind of break the immersion a little. A big complaint stacked against the MGS series is that the gameplay is too arcadey. And while this is easily the least arcadey one out of all the mainline games, just by sheer virtue of the complicated shit it offers and its general pacing, it does still very obviously turn things into very clear-cut numerical values that aren't only easily manipulated once you figure out how they work, but also might just be a tad too simple or silly for people coming off of shit like Thief or Splinter Cell or whatever. Though I'd be lying if I said that I didn't prefer it this way, as there is a type of innocent joy to be found in wearing kabuki face paint and shit. Not to mention how satisfying it can be to figure out which types of camo are more versatile in which environments. I mean, it's one thing to stand against a specific texture and look at the numbers, but to really take in the environment as a whole, to learn all of the plants, lighting details, color gradients and what have you, and then base your camo around that, is really quite sexual. So yeah, this game is kind of fucking excellent. Many people consider this to be the peak of the series, and well, that's probably because it is. The base mechanics from the previous two are refined to a mirror sheen, and all the things it adds only complement instead of detract. And there's also still a lot I'd like to say about the story as well, like how great the villain is, or how solid the directing, acting, and writing all are, especially considering some of Kojima's other outings. And don't even get me started on all of the little details I will now totally get started about regardless. Like the fact that there's optional codec calls for literally every single item, location, or situation. Or how about all of the different reactions you can get from the various types of guards while wearing disguises? And of course, there's also still the infamous ones, like how it uses the in-game clock to allow you to kill a boss through old age, though I use more creative measures. Or how it makes your food turn rotten after a couple of days of not playing, which I found out the hard way. Shit like that keeps you on your toes, and it's not intrusive to the point where it starts feeling gimmicky either. I mean, Kojima loves his details, and he also loves shoving them down your dick hole. But this time, he at least had the common courtesy to ask and lube you up. If there is one MGS game I'd recommend anyone picking up that isn't willing to invest into the entire series, then it's this one. It holds up very well on its own, being that it takes place first in the timeline, and it's also a very refined gameplay experience. And you can also do this.